I'm a senior solution architect at Octopus Deploy in the community team. So today we're going to be talking about pipelines, infrastructure as code, and deployments with Octopus. Okay, so let's start with the agenda. Don't worry, it's not going to be lots of slides. There's going to be lots of stuff in building and doing lots of cool stuff with Octopus. We're going to build a pipeline. We're going to use Azure DevOps for that. We're then going to create the release, push it over to Octopus, create the infrastructure using Runbooks. Then we're going to deploy the infrastructure for test. We're going to deploy the code and the database to test and production. And then I've got a little bit that I like to talk about Imposter Syndrome to try and encourage people to get up and do some talks. So at this point, straight into the demo. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the time today and mostly in Octopus and Azure DevOps talking through some of the pipeline stuff. So let's jump in and set the scene. Hello. So this is Azure DevOps. This is Octo Pet Shop. So Octo Pet Shop is like my luggage. I take it everywhere with me. The background with this one, just to set the scene, is Octo Pet Shop is an online pet store. It consists of a customer-facing website, a product service. So that would be a list of types of animals, etc., and pets, and then a shopping, and then a shopping cart service. So when you buy your cat online, it's stored there, and that's all. Those are all going to be deployed today using Azure Web Apps. And then lastly, I have a database side of things where I'm going to deploy the database, and then all using Azure Platform as a service, and using Octopus Runbooks. So let's jump in and we can start building some software. Okay, so we're going to just go straight in. I'll give you a quick demo of Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps has obviously, I think most people are aware what it is. It's Microsoft's CI and CD platform. In this demo today, I'm only going to be showing you the CI side of things. This demo does work equally well with other platforms such as Jenkins and so forth, and TeamCity as well. So what we'll do is we'll jump in. We've got a repo. So jump in, have a look here just to set some of the scene. So what we've got here is just a sample repo for Octo Pet Shop. It consists of your database. There's some bits around Kubernetes. There's some infrastructure scripts. There's the product service project. Then we've also got the tests, shopping cart server, and then the website. With that, we've also got your usual get ignore files, your Azure YAML file. We'll jump into that in just a moment. And then you've got some cake scripts, some build scripts, Docker Compose, and all that sort of good stuff. So today we are going to be focusing on building the software and then passing it over to Octopus, and then provisioning the infrastructure on the fly using Runbooks via Azure ARM templates and some PowerShell. Okay, so let's jump in and have a look at Azure Pipelines. Azure Pipelines is where you build and release your software. In this instance, I'm going to use the YAML version, but I'm actually going to talk you through it using the classic edition. So let's jump in. So we've got Octo Pet Shop. Let's have a look at the pipeline. There we go. So we've got your pipeline in place. It's got your usual bits. So obviously, Octo Pet Shop is a .NET Core app. It is a little out of date, but just one thing, the approaches used today are still equally valid. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a .NET restore, and then we're going to build our application. From there, we're going to test. So we're going to run through all of our tests that are built into Octo Pet Shop. The next 4 are very similar. At this point, we've restored the packages, we've built them, we've run through the tests. We're then going to publish. What we'll see here is you've got .NET publish, you've got your project file, and then some arguments. For instance, obviously specifying the release build configuration. And then from there, we're going to do very similar things for the web, then the product API, and then lastly, the shopping cart service. So at this point, what we have is, we have restored, we've built, we've tested, we've published the database, the website, the product API service, and the shopping cart service. One thing, what we're then doing is we are then using a built-in step that comes with the Azure DevOps extension that we operate. So we package this up. We've got the database, you've got the website, and then product service. One thing just to be aware of, if you jump into octopus.com/downloads, you'll see here that we have the Azure DevOps and TFS extension. If you are using another build server like Jenkins, etc., you can still, there's similar plugins for those as well. The main thing just to be aware of is this is effectively just a wrapper for the Octo CLI. So what you can do, things like run, create release, deployments as well. So you can actually just select get it free. In this instance, all of my Azure DevOps organizations already have it. Working at Octopus, that tends to mean that I'm doing a lot of things with Octopus. And I've been using Octopus actually for the last 10 years or thereabouts. So it's I've widely used it everywhere. So it's all in there. All you do is select your organization and then install the extension. So at this point, we're then just basically creating the zip file. So obviously we've went through this. We've created built it, and then we've going to zip it up. This, you can actually use NuGet. You can create different NuGet packages. Octopus doesn't really care. Generally, our preference is zip. Generally, it's just easier to use. And also with NuGet packages, they are effectively just zip files, just with some additional config. But in this instance, we're just creating zip files and passing these over to Octopus. So again, these are all very, very similar. We're putting them into the output directory, and then at this point, we then have our 4 packages. So that relates to our website, our product service, and our shopping cart service as well. So yeah, we do this, and then at this point, what we do is you'll notice here that we've got the Octopus Deploy server. This uses the Azure DevOps service connection. I'll show you that in just a moment. You have to add the extension in, and then at that point set up a service connection and point it to the Octopus server that you're after. You can have multiple different service connections. You can have one for development, test, and pre-prod, and all the way through to production. There's lots of ways to manage this. You can create service accounts with different permissions for different environments, for different spaces, for different projects. Lots of ways. What I would say is just be careful. Generally, you probably want more of a kind of read, write, admin level access. So this is just something to be aware of. Don't obviously put too much power in your service connection. And then at this point, also, I'm grabbing the build information. So that'll be things like fixes to tickets, which obviously you can use Azure boards for. So obviously you can create your work items. So this is actually, I'll show you this in just a moment as well when it's passed through to Octopus. Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to build, I'm going to run this. The main reason, it will come apparent later on, there's some, we basically start now, so that by the time I show you in Octopus, the servers are already created. Good stuff. I'm just going to select the master branch, apologies, that should be the main branch. So here is we are running this. Whilst that's happening, let's jump on over and jump in and actually have a look at the YAML build. So you can actually,
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the like on-premise versus the cloud, right? What do you need if you want to use the Octopus on-premise connected to the cloud? Yeah. Like, is it just the cloud only, or is it on-premise only, or there's a hybrid, and what do you need to get done, right?
No, that's a great point. Great point, Max. So obviously with this, any of what I'm showing just now will work in cloud or on-premise. The main thing with on-premise is you need to manage your own one. So Octopus Cloud has been a thing now for just coming up for roughly about just under 4 years now. So with cloud, you'll see that the actual approaches are very, very similar. The main difference really is just the connectivity. In this instance, if you use on-premise with TFS or Azure DevOps on-premise, or also Octopus Cloud or on-premise, really the approach is the same. You're still using a build server, you're still using that, and really the main difference is how you communicate with your servers. In this instance, what I find is on-premise will generally use listening tentacles. That's when the server connects to the tentacle. What we see more with cloud is we tend to see more like polling tentacles. That's when the server connects to, sorry, the tentacle connects to the server. So what we see there is that there is a slightly different way to communicate, but for the most part, they are very, very similar. There's a few small differences, like around authentication options. For instance, on-premises has Active Directory. Obviously, the cloud one doesn't, but you can have Azure Active Directory and all that stuff. But the approach that I'm using today will work equally well, because what you'll see here is I'm using webinar.octopus.app, and that is a cloud instance. I could quite easily do this on premise on one of my test boxes as well. So what you've got here is the YAML version of this. YAML stands, you probably know, but it's yet another markup language. This one always makes me laugh, because when someone told me it was that was what it was, I was like, really? I thought someone was pulling my leg. I think that's a local term, basically making fun of me. However, it isn't. So what this basically is I use YAML. I don't particularly enjoy it, if I'm being honest, but I dislike YAML and I love YAML in equal measures. I dislike writing it. I love using it because obviously it's super scalable, reusable. So in this instance, what we're just doing here is you can see everything is very human readable. You've got your trigger, but using YAML can be quite frustrating. So you're specifying the pool, you've got some variables that you're setting, so obviously the release variables, you're doing your .NET restore, the steps are the exact same. I do love Azure DevOps, it really does make things much easier. So what you've got here is the rest of the build, so you're doing your restore, your build, your test, you're publishing web, and you'll see here that obviously the projects, the arguments are all very, very similar to what we used before in the classic editor edition. So again, you come down, you've got lots of great stuff here, where basically you're just specifying it all. One thing just to be aware of, Octopus, we are just about to roll out config as code. That's a super powerful thing. Just to be aware, you are actually going to be able to use specify your deployment process using something called Octopus configuration language. That is something I did a webinar on in September, and we're just about to EAP. Some have it, some don't, and then it's going to be on premise. So definitely check that out. I can give you a quick demo today as well if you wish. So what we've got here is you've got your YAML file, and one thing that I love is you may not be like me. I actually originate from operations. Don't hold it against me. Obviously, I moved into DevOps and started doing things like builds and all that good stuff in 2012, 2013. And I wish I had tools like this back then. So for instance, if you did want to add something, what you can do is select from the task on the right hand side. So say for instance, you've got Octopus. You want to create another release, right? For you just specify, say for instance, the server, you've got the space, let's skip that set. So this, in this instance, it's going to be speaking, project group, this will be the all default, sorry, and then Octopet shop, put in the release number, and then effectively what you would just do is select add here, and then off it does, it pops it down here. You don't have to deal with the YAML formatting, which is, I'm fairly sure when I started using YAML, I had here. That's a joke I use a lot, but it's probably true. But yeah, what you can do here is actually add things, just actually as tasks rather than actually have to. Alternatively, you can also drop to code and do all that good stuff. Okay, so at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to releases. With releases, with any build server actually, what I like to do is I like to operate a little bit of Octopus. So if with any build, I'm a big fan of continuous delivery or continuous deployments. I almost always try and get that through all the way through to production. It may be controversial, but mainline branching and all that good stuff is definitely, for me anyway, the way forward. So at this point, we can jump in and actually see that we have we've got our Octo Pet Shop YAML one as well. So let's jump in and have a look here. So this is the release. All I'm doing is you've got the artifact which I'm specifying from the YAML build. So you'll see that I had the CI version, sorry, the UI version or the classic editor does, and that's going to that. Then we've got the YAML one going to a separate one. So let's have this. So you've got some things that you can do. You can set it on a schedule. You can actually use it here and also use. This is my biggest tip: enable continuous deployments. At least to test anyway. I'm a big fan of this. I think it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's definitely something that I am a big advocate. So at this point, we're going to jump into stages. All I do here is I create the release, effectively just using the built-in task. Again, you've specified the Octopus Deploy server, the space, the project group, and to see that, let's just jump in actually. You can come into the project settings and then select service connections, and this is where you would add your service connection. So that's just something to be aware of. Let's jump into release management. Sorry, a little bit. Let's just jump in. So yeah, we're just creating the release. All we're doing is using the built-in step, which basically creates Octopus release. We've got some specifying the space, the project group, and the project, and then lastly, what we also do is deploy the release. So there's you'll see here there's two things. One is disabled, one is not. This is what we're effectively doing is we're deploying this to test straight away. As soon as the release is created, we spin up test, and as part of test, we're also going to spin up the infrastructure on the fly as part of that. So what we've got here is we've also got an Octopus CLI command. This also would work. So if you wanted to spin up the infrastructure as part of, from Azure DevOps, you can actually tell Octopus to run your runbook, specify the create infrastructure one, your project, the environment, and then the space, speaking, and then some timeout options as well. So this approach is just as good as the approach I'm about to show you. So let's jump in. That's been a fairly long ramp up. Let's jump in and actually do some bits in Octopus. So hello, this is Octopus Deploy. Down the left-hand side here, this is obviously just a single space that I've created for this talk. Down the left-hand side tends to be things which are projects which are shipped together. So think if you have a monolith application, that's all a self-contained large application, you're likely going to have a single project here. If you buy into the microservices architecture, you're likely to have several thousand. So obviously Octopus does deal with that really well. And what you can do is we actually use Octopus to deploy Octopus Cloud. It's pretty cool. What they basically do, we use Runbooks, different projects as well to spin up different bits. So for instance, we use Octopus Cloud to spin up new instances via Terraform and all that sort of good stuff. And we're doing things as well, and we use multi-tenancy. I won't go into that just now, but multi-tenancy is a great way to manage your tenants. I've generally found that we're the only deployment tool that really does multi-tenancy as a first-class concept. Okay, so you'll see here we've got Octo Pet Shop, and then you've got test and production. I normally have test, production, development, pre-prod, etc. And this approach works just as well. I'm just going to go on mute for a second. I'm going to cough. Okay, so let's jump in. So obviously you've got the dashboard. That scales really well. Just something to be aware of. As you can see here, I did run through this just before today's session. It still works. At least I think it. Well, at least I hope it works. So what you've got down here on the left-hand side is you've got your deployments aspect, you've got operations. Runbooks is, I love Runbooks. I think it's one of the things, because I come from an operations background and then into DevOps, I just love the fact that I can see all of my operations tasks in the same project. Runbook tends, Runbooks is something we only released in January last year. It tends to be operation type tasks, so things like provisioning infrastructure. That works both in the cloud. So if you're using Azure, you're using GCP, AWS. We honestly don't really care where you're hosting it. You can also do it with VMware via Power CLI scripts and Hyper-V scripts as well. So you can actually use Octopus to provision. I have it. I've got a Dell PowerEdge T620 with 100 and I think it's 192 gig of RAM. And I use that to actually provision my new servers that I need, and then I can destroy them again, or containers as well. So what you'll see here is a little orange eye. This is a good sign. So what we've got, let's jump into the deployment process. One of the key things and benefits of Octopus is that you use the single deployment process for your application. So whether it's dev, test, pre-prod, production, or any other environments that we use, it's a single deployment process. The main thing is the reusability of Octopus. So this is a deployment process. So let's just spend a moment. We'll go through the deployment process and just see what we're doing here. So this is actually our Run Octopus Deploy Runbook step. This is something Run Octopus. There we go. This was actually created by the VP of the Customer Solutions team. When we released it last year, we didn't actually have a way to run an Octopus Runbook from within the deployment process. We'd separated it out, and then people were like, I want to do this as part of my deployment. And you're like, this doesn't make any sense. But it does. It makes perfect sense. You know, for instance, this exact use case. But with Runbooks, is you can also do things like SQL backups, you can do Windows backups, you can do disaster recovery failovers. Really, if you can script it, Runbooks can do it. And this is what this is doing. So when we create the release, the first step it does, and it's only for test, it actually creates the entire infrastructure stack, all in a self-contained Azure resource group. So let's just see. I'll go into that in a little moment. So we've got this. We're using Octopus variables here to specify the runbook name. Biggest tip I can give you with Octopus is never hard code anything. Much like you do development best practices, possible, always use a variable. In this instance, I've actually just created a one-off variable. The key thing I find is if I hard code something, at some point, somewhere, I'm going to have to fix it. I'm effectively just obviously addressing technical debt up front by creating the variable. So we've got the runbook create, we've got the base URL, we've got the API. What this is only API to then tell it to run a runbook as part of your deployment process. So again, like we've got some systems you can use. So anything Octopus dot is a system variable. So you've got Octopus dot space name, environment name, and then obviously this is all part of this. And then what you have is some run conditions down at the bottom. Run conditions, there's lots of different things to do, but in this instance, because of the way I'm dealing with the infrastructure, I only want to spin this up for test, right? Because production probably shouldn't be offline at any point. So we don't create new infrastructure for production. You can, if you adopted blue-green deployment, you can approach it that way, where, so with Azure, you could do blue-green with web apps using slots, etc., or you could do it in IIS or Tomcat, different sites. There's lots of different ways to do it. But in this instance, I'm just spinning up and destroying my infrastructure on as I go, which I love, because the cost of hosting servers is probably one of the biggest costs. And if you go from having a server online 24/7 and you're paying for that server, that could, if you spin up your test and dev and pre-prod, etc., infrastructure on the go, you're paying for sometimes 15, 20 minutes of compute versus 24 the savings are monumental. So yeah, okay, let's jump in. So we're going to do a health check. The health check we need to run because we're creating the infrastructure. So when we create the release, the infrastructure doesn't actually exist. So that's something in Octopus called dynamic infrastructure. So something to be aware of, you have to do a health check before you can do a deployment to it. So I've created infrastructure and then doing a health check on all new targets. And then I have a manual intervention step. So at this point, all this is this is just a check that you can remove at any point. And this step will run only in production. So steps 1, 2, and 3 will never, ever, in this configuration, these will never run at the same time. If you're creating infrastructure, there's no need for a manual intervention or a health check, etc. Sorry, yeah. And then the next few steps are very similar. I'm deploying the app service. So I've built this, I've built the application. It's to be hosted. Got all this good stuff. I'm using Windows. I'm using, the worker pools to do this. Specifying the package. There's some options around deployment slots. You may want to specify a particular path. And then obviously you've got your .NET configuration transforms and all that sort of good stuff. The next few steps are very similar. At the end of the day, all we're doing is doing a deployment of here. And you'll see here, we've got a little double dash. Let me just zoom in. And you've got this on screen. So what you can see is this actually means it runs in parallel. So let's just come out. And what this basically means is you can run these 3 steps the same time. This actually means that you can do concurrent deployment. So if you're going to do this, then I want to hit all my web apps at the same time. And then at this point, you're then going to deploy the database. The deploy a database step is just a deploy a package step. This comes built in with Octopus. And what you can basically do is you can deploy your database from a worker. You don't actually have to have it on your SQL server. And in this instance, we're not even using a SQL server. We're using an Azure SQL server, which is just a logical device to connect to and store your SQL databases. Okay, and then I think this is quite cool. At this point, I stop, and there's a manual intervention, and this is just to give the person the ability to test their new code on the newly created infrastructure. Once you have ran through your tests and are happy with outcome or unhappy with outcome, and you're reporting that back, you would just come in, do your manual intervention, approve it, and then lastly, just destroy the infrastructure. At this point, I'm just going to take a moment, and I'm going to jump back and actually show you that this deployment has worked. So we've got 2021 11.11.9. So that, yes, that does mean that I've practiced this 9 times today. So let's jump in and let's have a look at the deployment process. Okay, so there we go. Everything's good here. We've created infrastructure for test. Let's just jump on over. And this was something that only just ran very recently. So there we go. There's the runbook. I will go into this in detail in just a moment. It's created the resource group, the Azure SQL Server, the empty database, the app service plan, and then created the product service, shopping cart service, and the website web apps, which is great. So at this point then, it's went through, checked the health of the servers. We have then deployed the 3 web apps. And then from there, we've then deployed the Azure SQL database, and then we've got the manual intervention step. So this is a bit, so let's jump into the task log. And then what we're going to do, one of the things I like about this step is it actually, and this is the moment I've been waiting for. You just jump in, this will take a moment. With Azure Web Apps, it's a bit like IIS, so there's a load time. It's not always the fastest, but drum roll. Is it going to load? Is it going to load? I hope it does. Yes, and it loads. So we have Octo Pet Shop. So at this point, you can buy your dogs for $100. I don't know about you, but my dogs cost a lot more than $100. And then obviously, your cat, your fish, and then the octopus, which $250 for an octopus also seems cheap for some reason. I'm not sure if it's like a little octopus plushie toy or a real octopus, or the Kraken. $250 for the Kraken at your front door. That's a terrifying thought. Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do is
you can buy a bundle, right? Octopus and the fish, they can feed the fish into the octopus.
It'd be a lot of fish. It would be a lot of fish. So at this point, I'm going to approve the manual intervention step, and then at this point, it's going to actually. Oh, I meant to show you that the infrastructure does exist. So in test, it does exist, and then it shouldn't in about 30 to 45 seconds. Let's jump on over to the. There we go. That's just here, and then we should see. There we go. We're destroying the infrastructure just for test, which is good. So just a few things whilst that's happening. I'm going to jump in and show you some actual runbooks. I honestly, I it's not a broken record. I probably prefer runbooks over deployments. It's just such a great feature, and it really does improve how you do things. So in this instance, again, I was showing you. One thing just to be aware of, webinar.octopus.app, this is actually enabled with guest authentication. So if you ever wanted to come in and grab some of this configuration, you totally can. What I'd ask is don't do it just now. I am using it. Generally, try and keep people off it whilst I'm doing demos. I'm not sure how much I'd have to sacrifice to the demo gods. So there we go. What we're doing here is we're just creating a resource group. In this instance, it is just a bit of PowerShell. You could do this using Azure CLI, ARM templates, all that sort of good stuff. But what this basically does is it's the first step. It's the logical container for everything. Without the resource group, you cannot deploy any of your resources. So what we're just doing here is just specifying the PowerShell script for that. In this instance, we're then deploying that Azure SQL Server. This is bound to an Azure account. So within Octopus, if you come to infrastructure and then accounts, you can actually set your Azure service principal. And then in this instance, there is actually an ARM template here. So you can jump in.
Can I ask a question while you're on this? So this is all ARM templates, right? How does it play with Terraform or Bicep?
Exact same. To be honest, Bicep, I've not actually jumped into Bicep with it just yet, but when looking at it, Bicep should just be able to something that you can just call, because obviously you can just basically grab a file via a GitHub repository and do that. Terraform works beautifully. We actually use Terraform as part of Octopus Cloud, and that's actually connected to there. So Terraform works just fine. So yeah, you could definitely do it. You know, if you're on AWS as well, you can use CloudFormation. So yeah, really, if it's configuration, we can do a lot of things with Kubernetes as well. But yeah, that should just Terraform with some Terraform clouds, probably a good idea. You know, obviously make sure you track your state. But yeah, Max, it works just fine. I don't have a demo, unfortunately, of Terraform just now. But yes, you can definitely use Terraform. Actually, whilst I'm doing that.
Cool, thank you.
No problem at all. So you can actually do, so for instance here, Terraform. There we go. So there's a few steps. So anything here you'll see with blue at the bottom, that's actually built into Octopus. If it's white at the bottom, that's a community step template. So yes, we are, and anything there as well in the community step, we also support as well via our support team. So what we've got there is the SQL Server, which is great. Again, you'll notice here there's no parallelism. That's a lot of L's. The main reason is you can't create the data. You can't create the database until you have a SQL Server. You can't. Then you're creating your app service, which is your app service plan. Again, this is just using ARM templates. There we go. But yeah, let's check this out. And then what happens is any of your parameters then appear actually in the ARM template deployment that we use. So again, what we've just got is Azure. We've got lots of variables here. And one thing just to be aware, if you are using Octopus, look at library variable sets. Library variable sets is a way for you to effectively push most of your configuration so you can share it across multiple projects. So at this point, yep, we'll the next few steps are all very similar. We're effectively just creating an app service and then registering it. So you'll see here, you've got your source code. There's some bits here that we're doing. Obviously, we've got some parameters that we need to specify. So that's like, so the location, I'm a big fan of using West Europe because it's just across the water in Dublin. And then obviously you get the hosting plan names, the server firm, resource groups, lots of stuff that you can figure here. And then lastly, you register it. So you can actually use the PowerShell script to register the web app. Web apps actually, just one thing to be aware of, obviously, Azure web apps, you don't install the tentacle on there. It is the app service, sorry, the service principal that you use there to do that. Go. So at this point, the next few steps are all very similar. You're just registering and then creating and then registering web apps. But yeah, so let's jump on over. Let's discard those changes. And then we're just going to deploy to production. Production is always online. At this point, we can sit back, we can watch the deployment live, and at this point, I'm going to go to my fridge. And I have my whiskey. So at this point, we are getting to the end of today's demo. So if you do have questions just now, there is a little bit of time for me to answer. I will also go back to a Q&A bit before wrapping up on some imposter syndrome bits. So if anyone has any questions about the process,
I have a
I'm more than
question.
happy to.
What about the testing? Testing and monitoring.
Yes. So with this, you can definitely, so with the testing side of things, it's not something that's first class, that's built into, fully featured within Octopus. That doesn't mean that you can't do deployment. For instance, I've done a lot of penetration testing. I've done a lot of load testing. You can definitely use Octopus for that. It's not a fully featured thing. But what you can do is if you are using some of your monitoring tools, so for instance, let's say jump on over to, I'll just see this. One moment. So for instance, your relic. So you could actually so when you're doing your deployments, unless you have zero downtime deployments, which obviously you can do with Octopus, you've got this. I've used Pingdom in the past as well. There's Datadog. There's lots of different things that you can do. But what you can do, Max, is you can actually, so for instance, you do your deployments, you could actually just have, say, a VM that does that, or a worker, and then you could run through your performance scripts, you could run through obviously your penetration tools. So that's definitely something that you can do. And actually, it's something that we've been talking to some testing companies about. But yeah, you can definitely do things like monitoring. And actually, right, so here's a cool story. I like I said obviously a few times now, I really love Runbooks. I absolutely love them. What happened last year, just after Octopus, just after we released Runbooks, we were having some problems with our website. Everyone has them sometimes. Well, some people have them some of the times, not all the time, hopefully. Then you probably need to look at your PG. So what happened, I'm obviously one of the first people in Europe. We had a couple others. Sometimes the website would go offline, and I would jump on, I would restart the app service. Hey, what do you know? Up it comes. I'm not a developer, but what I did there is I let the development team obviously jump in. In fact, we understood the issue. Using it was timing out, and it didn't deal with it very well, and it fell over. So I actually run because I was the only person that had access to production. I wrote a run book that just restarted the web app. It wasn't it's not an elegant solution, but it was the solution that worked until we actually figured out the problem. And what it actually did was effectively just check the website every 3 minutes. Every 3 minutes, it would just check that. If we got obviously a good code, but if we got a 300 code, yep, that's good. Anything else, it effectively waited 2 minutes, checked it again. The main reason the 2 minutes is the app service was still processing transactions. Those were just finishing off. And then at that point, I just had a Azure CLI command that just restarted the web app, and what do you know, up it came. So when, you know, sometimes there was a problem with the website, it was 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. So that's something that you can do, and it's quite a cool use case, I actually thought. Okay, so at this point, the production has deployed. Let's come in and we should just test that. Okay.
Can you, and again, sorry to put you on the spot, but
No,
can you highlight the differences, what Octopus can do for deployments versus what Azure DevOps cannot, right? What Octopus can do for deployments that Azure DevOps can't.
Yeah. So obviously Azure DevOps is very much tied into Azure. What Octopus does is we honestly don't really care where your platform is. So if it's there, one moment, the whiskey hit the wrong part of the throat. What we tend to do though is we tend to go for a more of an inclusive approach. We love Azure DevOps. I am a big fan of it. But what it does, it doesn't have the same. It doesn't have this. I personally just think it's better. There's a few things, the key bits. One of them is multi-tenancy. So multi-tenancy is a way for you to have a single deployment process. So we have roughly 4,000 organizations on cloud. Yeah, so we have about 4,000, and that's all controlled by a single deployment process. What happens is when you go into octopus.com and sign up for a cloud instance, what happens is the tenant is automatically created, and then at that point it's provisioned. Everything all in the background all happens, and that all happens with a single deployment process. We have 4,000 environments. If you are, say, something like a SaaS company, then obviously that would be a great solution for you, because no other platform does multi-tenancy. It's fully featured. It tends to be like, you know, a single database with multiple applications connecting to it. But yeah, with Azure DevOps, obviously you don't have the concept of dashboards. So like, for instance, if you come into the view with Azure DevOps, is that you see a few of your projects. Whereas if you go to, this only really works when you go to something like, say, we've got a few things that you can use, but what you have is that first-class dashboard. So you can come in and actually see what application is where, because once, obviously I'm showing you a very, you know, very kind of small view. However, obviously once you scale, once you obviously get into hundreds or thousands of projects, you know, this does get busy, but you can have a single place to do it. But ultimately, Azure DevOps and Octopus do a very similar functionality where they can deploy to. Obviously, we can do Kubernetes, Linux, web apps, Lambdas, everything really. So there's lots of different. Ultimately, we see it more of a Azure DevOps and Octopus. Because to be honest, when you actually, I just don't approach here. I love Azure DevOps, but ultimately I just find Octopus far easier to use. Obviously, you do now have config as code, so it is something. If you come into here and then you come into features, you can actually see that you have configuration as code enabled. It is an early access feature, but this is something that that's also one thing just to be aware of. With Azure DevOps, you cannot use YAML for your release management. It has to be the editor edition. And the key thing that I love about this approach is we do it in the browser, we do it in the command in Git. So, for instance, if you're a developer and you're comfortable in VS Code, that you can definitely do that. And then also you sync it like a Git client, that's actually a shared Git repository. And so if you also want to then do it in the UI, you can also do that, but all powered by Git. You know, so for instance, you can still do branching and all that and test things and all that sort of good stuff. So yeah, any other questions?
How does the authentication works?
Authentication for Octopus.
For Octopus, yeah.
Yeah.
Like the
So
connection and whatnot, right? How do we talk? How do you ensure that proper people can deploy and approvals and whatnot?
yeah, right. Yeah. So with so obviously we'll go authentication and then the permission model. So authentication wise, we have built-in a built-in provider, so you can have Octopus provided. If it's on-premise, you can do Active Directory, Google Cloud, Google apps, and then Azure Active Directory. There's some Okta bits in there. When it comes to permissions, the big thing is to integrate it to your application. So to using Azure Active Directory, integrate it to your groups, etc., and then map those to teams. So in this instance, obviously we've not got as many because it is just obviously there's only 10, 15 people who actually use this instance, but you can definitely, it's very scalable. You start with Spaces. We launched Spaces in January 2019. This has probably simplified things in some ways and made more things complex. But yeah, from here, the biggest one that we see is operations. Developers can deploy to everywhere but production. So you can commit. You can create your team, so obviously say prod deployers, you can add your development group and then basically embed it in there. But from here, you would create a team, map it to your Azure Active Directory group or your Active Directory group, put obviously your authentication provider for that group membership, and then from there, map it to a team and then assign the permissions in Octopus for that team.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. Unless there's any other questions, I'll jump through and just wrap a few things up. I like to do this. I like to. I've been speaking publicly for the last three and a bit years. It's really helped me in many different ways. It's also made given me a lot of anxiety in the past as well. And what I like to do is just talk about imposter syndrome. Obviously, I still have it. It's definitely better than it used to be. But what is imposter syndrome? It's basically the experience, and often internal, where you just don't feel that competent. You know, I think for me personally, mine started when I joined Octopus, because obviously from there I became a bit more public than I was used to. Identified by psychologists Pauline Rose-Clance and Suzanne Eames in 1978. There's that link to perfectionism. You feel like a phony. Like you know, obviously when I've done this in the past, it's like, oh, I hope they don't find me out that I don't know this random technology. And really, it's an awful thing to experience, because it creates a lot of anxiety. Obviously, it was initially thought to be linked to high achieving females. And what's actually happened is it affects everyone. Well, affects many people, sorry, more people than you think it does. Different backgrounds, social statuses, expertise, classes, professions. It really does affect lots of different people, and ultimately leads to you almost sabotaging your own success that you don't feel that you deserve. How I deal with it, I talk about it. Since talking about it really helps me. From here, I just kind of talk about it with colleagues and friends, definitely friends first. Colleagues, if you can't talk about that thing at work, I'd probably look at your working environment. The big thing that I do is I mentally reinforce myself. It's like, yeah, you know, no one's found out yet. But yeah, basically, it's just about kind of realizing you are awesome, and it's okay not to know something. I think with technology nowadays, it can be very hard that it moves so quickly. You give so much to yourself, but it's okay admitting to yourself and to others that you don't know that thing. It's okay. Don't obsess about perfection. I don't. You know, I'm a big fan of that 80-20 rule. You know, obviously I can get 80% of the way there with 20%. You know, it's good enough. Faking it until you make it. Not for everybody. I remember a story that I like to share is I was at a large organisation. Sorry, I worked at a small organisation some time ago, and we were at a massive organisation. I was supposed to be doing a presentation on SQL databases with Sitecore, and I knew SQL, I knew Sitecore, but what happened was the project manager and the tech lead both called in sick that day. So I was like, oh, I need to go, armed with just an iPad. So the anxiety, literally, the closer I got to the building, anxiety started going up. I went in, I saw their technology team. Their technology team was bigger than my entire company by a distance. And then I find out that they're all Oracle DBAs. Suddenly, it's just like the crescendo was coming up. I went in with an iPad on a presentation. We went through it, and it went wonderfully. By that, there was about 15 DBAs in the room. And really, I felt amazing. I kind of came out. We had a great talk with a great relationship, and I actually then became their technical lead. By 5 years after that, it became such a good environment. And so sometimes just faking it until you make it, and in actual fact, it's more that you've made it and you just don't realise. What I would also say is give speaking a chance if you can. If this isn't for you, that's totally cool. But if you know someone, encourage them, maybe spend their lunchtime listening to their talk, giving them some feedback. And a little quote that I'm not sure where it came from. I found it on the internet. I'm a big advocate for this. Don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to you yesterday. We're not all Scott Hanselman or Troy Hunt or, we're not Scott Guthrie, etc. What I would say is just always keep on trying to improve, keep trying to learn. And if you're better than you were 6 months ago, you're doing fantastic. Well done. Keep up the good work. At that point, just a little bit of resources. If you want to reach out to us, support Octopus for support problems, sales at Octopus for licensing questions. If you do have anything there, advice is we have a free advice one that's where I used to work in customer solutions. And there's lots of great stuff on YouTube as well, on youtube.com/Octopus Deploy. Thank you so much for attending my talk. I really do hope you've learned something. And if you do ever want to talk about Octopus Deploy or anything DevOps related, check me out on Twitter at DevOps Derek.
Thank you, Derek. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, definitely. I learned a lot. So, thank you. Thank you very much again. Thank you for your presentation, for the demos, for staying up late. Thank you. And does anybody have any questions? People will call it a day.
I just want to say one thing. I love the ending of your presentation.
Thank you so much.
That is such a true thing, the imposter syndrome, and even the Scott Guthries of the world have it.
Everyone, I think
everyone at some point feels like it. But yeah, when you're speaking, people they're interested in the topic and they came to listen, and yeah, you just got to remember, people don't all expect you to know everything, and yeah, it's a great point. Great point. Good presentation.
Yeah, that's the key thing. No one can know everything, right? As long as you know enough, or your Google your Google skills, or oh, sorry, I've just activated my Google device. It's probably going to start screaming at me. But thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
We're calling it a night, I guess. Really late night or early morning for Derek, and we will post the next meeting. It will most likely going to be the new Kubernetes stuff. So you'll get it in your mailbox, I guess. Thank you very much. And again, if you the topic that you would like to hear on or speak on, let us know. And Derek, when you have that infrastructure as code thing or configuration as code presentation ready, please come back.
Oh, it's if you want, I can come back in a couple of months when it's in general availability. So yeah, definitely, let's do it.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward.
We'll be reaching out.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Bye, guys.
Bye.